The names are gone. 5 centuries before Columbus. Viking ships found North America. The Vikings called it Vinland. Archaeologists have walked the longhouses, carbon dated the rivets, pressed their hands into the post holes. It happened. And the navigators who made those crossings possible have no names in any record. Pick it up. Milky white, translucent, roughly the size of a fist. Hold it against an overcast sky, the kind the North Atlantic gives you for weeks. Grey all the way to the edge. Tilt it slowly. At a certain angle, something happens inside the stone. 2 faint images of the sun appear where a moment ago there was nothing but cloud. Keep tilting. When the 2 images reach the same brightness, stop. The sun is at that bearing. In that grey void, with no horizon, no stars, nothing to fix on, you know exactly where you are. Someone held this stone to this sky and figured out what the light was doing. Stood next to another person on a wet deck, pressed the stone into their hand and said, like this, tilt it like this. That someone has no name. The Grœnlendinga Saga, written in Iceland around 1200 AD and one of 2 main sources for the Vinland voyages, records Leif Erikson's name 31 times. The name of his father's farm in Greenland. The name of his ship. 35 men aboard. The dimensions of the houses they built in Vinland. The length of the longhouse. The width, the height of the roof beam. The specific timber they cut. The grapes they found, and the word they used for them. It does not record the name of a single navigator. You are on that ship. Late October, 9 days out of Greenland, open water in every direction, 1 coast behind you and one you have never seen. The sail is down. The wind shifted before dawn, and now the sky runs grey from horizon to horizon. No sun visible. No stars possible. No fixed point anywhere in the world except the ship itself. The air smells of nothing. Not land, not ice, not the shallows. Just open water, which has a smell. Cold, flat, nothing else to it. The ship moves under oar. 34 men pulling. The oars are working against swells that arrive at an angle that doesn't match the wind. Nothing in the air. No land, no ice, no shallows. You know what the color of the water says. Still too dark, still deep, still open ocean. In 2 days it will lighten, grey-green at first, then greener. That change will tell you something the stone cannot. You know because 7 years ago, your first winter crossing, the man beside you pressed your bare hand against the side of the hull and held it there. Below the waterline, where you could feel the swell's direction in the wood rather than see it in the water. The wood was cold enough to hurt. He kept your hand there until you stopped noticing the cold. Then you started noticing what was underneath it, the rhythm, the angle, the specific way the hull moved when deep water was below rather than shallow. He said nothing for a long time. Then Nien. Deep ocean feels like this. Water near a coast feels different. You'll know it when you feel it. It took 4 more crossings before you could tell the difference in the dark. He has been dead for 3 years. Fever. On a return crossing from Iceland. He went into the water in the night, and by morning the sea had already forgotten him. Not one word of it was ever written down. You have been at sea for 9 days. The crew knows you know where you are. They are watching the back of your head. You have made this crossing before. The uncertainty is familiar, more or less. What's different is the month. October, this late, with winter already closing from the north. The man who taught you made this crossing in October once. He said, the margin is small. The window between passage and ice is weeks, not months. If you are wrong about where you are, you will not have time to correct it. He was talking about himself. He didn't know he was talking about you. You reach into the pouch at your belt. You take out the sunstone. You hold it to the grey sky and tilt it slowly, and you wait. The two images balance. You know where you are. Your name will not survive the winter. The stone is still in your hand. The stone in your hand is Icelandic spar, a crystal found across Iceland and Scandinavia, clear as glass, the size of a fist. The man who taught you pressed his thumb against the flat face and said, "It reads the sky when the sky gives you nothing." The physics, quickly. Light entering the crystal splits into 2 beams. Hold the stone to the sky and rotate it slowly. 2 faint images of the sun appear inside the stone. Keep turning. At a certain point, both images reach the same brightness. Stop there. The sun is at that angle, even through complete cloud cover. In 2013, Arnt Olav Bjørkum, a Norwegian scientist, ran the test. Skilled users of Icelandic spar could hold a precise course across open ocean in total overcast. The Viking navigators used this in 1000 AD. In 1592, 572 years later, an English ship sank near the island of Alderney off the Norman coast. When marine archaeologists recovered the wreck in 2013, they found a magnetic compass in the navigator's chest, and beside it, a piece of Icelandic spar. The compass had been standard for 400 years by then. Every serious navigator in Europe carried one. This man carried both. Iron ballast deflects the compass needle. The reading shifts without warning, and if you don't know that, you're trusting a direction that's wrong. Heavy weather makes the compass card swing. It needs time to settle, and in a storm, there isn't any. Cloud blocks the stars, the sun, every fixed reference. The compass still works in fog, but it just tells you which way is north. Not where you are. Not how far. The crystal finds the sun through solid cloud. Hold it right and you get the sun's actual position, which tells you the time of day, which tells you your latitude. In 1592, this navigator already had a working compass. He kept the stone anyway. Because the stone solved problems the compass couldn't touch. Whoever taught him that had learned it from someone who'd learned it before the compass existed. Navigator to navigator, nothing written. Somewhere around 1200 AD, a navigator on a Greenland to Iceland crossing is teaching the stone to the man who will replace him, 2 centuries after Vinland was abandoned, 3 centuries before the Alderney ship sank. The route is shorter than the Vinland crossing, safer, but it's still the North Atlantic, overcast for days, swells coming from conflicting directions, no visible horizon in the early fog. The teacher is perhaps 60. He has made this crossing more times than he can count. His hands are the color of rope. He does not explain the crystal. He hands it to the younger man and tells him to hold it to the sky and rotate it. The younger man does. Nothing happens for a moment. Then the two images appear, faint and separate inside the stone. "Keep turning," the teacher says. The images drift toward each other. Keep turning. And then they balance. Same brightness, stopped. And the younger man stops and looks at where the stone is pointing and understands. The teacher says, "That is where the sun is." The younger man looks at the sky, solid grey, nothing visible. He looks back at the stone. He looks at the sky again. He will spend the next 3 years learning the rest. The color of the water at different depths, the smell of air near ice versus air near land, the swell's direction through the hull on his first night crossing alone, his hands flat against the wet wood in the dark, the teacher's voice somewhere behind him, saying nothing. Because there is nothing more to say. Either you feel it or you don't. And the only way to learn which is to be out there in the dark when it matters. The teacher will die before the younger man makes his first solo Vinland crossing. The knowledge crosses anyway. But his name, there's no mechanism for that, no form that exists in 1200 AD that carries a craftsman's name alongside his skill. The name stays in the water somewhere between Greenland and Iceland, already gone by the time the coast comes into view. 5 centuries after the last Vinland crossing, a stone ground by Viking hands sat in a dead navigator's chest on the English coast. Someone put it there. Wave patterns were a second instrument. Close your eyes on a North Atlantic crossing and the ocean talks through the hull. The angle swells hit the wood, the difference between deep water and shallower water near a coast. A rhythm that shifts as you approach land, even when land is invisible. A navigator with enough crossings could hold a course in total darkness. No stone, no stars, purely by what the wood told his hands. Polynesian navigators found the same thing on the Pacific independently. No contact with the Norse at all. A third instrument flew. Birds. A 2020 study by researchers at the University of Iceland cross-referenced the bird sighting descriptions in the Vinland sagas against the known ranges of specific North Atlantic species and found exact correspondence. Northern gannets never fly more than 200 kilometers from their nesting grounds, and the sagas place them at precisely the distances a navigator would use to judge how far land was. Atlantic puffins, Arctic terns, each species appears at the latitudes their biology requires. The saga writers weren't naturalists. They were writing down what navigators told them. Someone spent years building that knowledge across thousands of miles of open ocean. And what survives is the data, cleaned up with the source removed. A fourth instrument swam, whale migration routes. North Atlantic right whales shift their feeding patterns with the season. A navigator who'd crossed enough times knew that a specific species in a specific month meant a specific water temperature, which told you roughly where you were. You learn to read that the same way you learn to read the swells, by being wrong and then right again until it stopped being luck. Nothing about it is written down anywhere. What we know comes from other cultures in the same waters who kept their own records. No book, no notes, just someone older pressing your hand against a hole in the dark. And not one name. The Grønlendinga Saga records whose axe it was. Midway through the Vinland settlement account, a group of Skraelings kills a Norse settler. The saga records the weapon, an axe. It records that the axe had been traded to the Skraelings the previous autumn. It records the name of the man the axe originally belonged to. The same saga records the specific word the settlers used for the wild grapes they found, vinbur, and the debate among the crew about whether the grapes were worth the voyage. It records the name of the thrall, a man called Turka, who found the grapes and was so excited he lapsed back into his native language before he could explain what he'd seen. A slave. His name is in the document. The man who navigated the ship that brought that settler to Vinland has no name anywhere. Erikson's father's farm at Brattahlid was located with enough precision that archaeologists found it in 1961. The site at Kasiarsuk in Greenland, confirmed by soil analysis and longhouse remains matching the saga's dimensions exactly. Erikson himself shows up in two independent written sources, both pointing to his conversion to Christianity at King Olaf Tryggvason's court in Norway around 999 AD. The navigator is nowhere. Gisli Sigurdsson, a scholar at the Arni Magnusson Institute for Icelandic Studies, points to the Gothar, the regional chieftains who shaped what the sagas recorded. It worked like this. When a Norse landholder died, his heirs needed to prove things. Who his father was, what land had been cleared, which agreements had been made. The saga was the proof. Legal disputes went to the thing. And what mattered there was who said what, who witnessed it, who the party's ancestors were. The saga held all of that. Turka's name survived because he belonged to Leif Erikson, which meant what he did reflected on Eriksson's household, which meant it was legally relevant. The system worked fine for everyone it was built for. A navigator's knowledge didn't fit it. It moved through teaching, had no owner, produced no deed, created no claim. Nobody would ever need to cite it, so it wasn't recorded. And that decision, made without anyone quite making it, was permanent. The navigators who got his ship across 2,800 kilometers of open North Atlantic left coordinates for nothing. Go back to the Alderney ship. Go back to the chest. The compass is there. So is the stone. The magnetic compass deflects near iron, ballast, fittings, any significant metal mass in the hold, and the reading shifts without you knowing. In heavy weather, the card swings and won't settle. In fog and cloud, the compass still works, but all it gives you is north, which isn't the same as knowing where you are. The crystal doesn't care about iron, reads instantly in any conditions, and in cloud cover tells you not just direction, but position. The sun's angle through the stone gives you your latitude. A navigator who'd crossed the North Atlantic in winter had felt every one of those compass failure modes personally. He kept the stone because in the conditions that actually killed people, it worked better. A tool from the year 1000 outperforming one from 1592. That's what the chest contained. When the Vinland settlements were abandoned around 1020 AD, the crossing stopped. So did the teaching. It pulled back to shorter routes, Greenland to Iceland, Iceland to Norway, where the chain could survive at lower stakes. The sunstone technique stayed alive there, passed privately, written nowhere, for another 572 years. Then a ship sank at Alderney, and the stone turned up in a chest beside the instrument that was supposed to have replaced it. Carl Emil Petersen, documenting Greenlandic Inuit navigation in the 1880s, found the same techniques in active use among Inuit navigators who had no contact with the Norse tradition. Reading swells through the hull, judging distance from land by which birds appeared, tracking sea color as the water shallowed. He watched a navigator lie flat on the bottom of a kayak, eyes closed, one hand trailing in the water, reading the current's direction through his fingertips while the rest of the crew waited. The man said nothing for several minutes. Then he pointed. He was right. The Inuit chain was intact. Petersen could watch it, ask questions, write it down. The Norse chain had been broken for 860 years by the time he arrived. In 2000, W. Hodding Carter sailed a replica Viking Nar from Greenland to Newfoundland, using only the navigational methods he could reconstruct from the saga accounts: the stone, the swell, the birds, the sea color. No compass, no GPS, no satellite weather data. The crossing took weeks through long stretches of total overcast, swells from conflicting directions, fog that sat on the water for days. He reached the Newfoundland coast at the latitude the sagas describe for Vinland. The roots are still there. The gannets still range 200 kilometers from their colonies. In 2016, Margot Lee Shetterly published Hidden Figures. It named the African-American mathematicians whose orbital calculations NASA relied on for Mercury and Gemini, women who'd been left out of the official histories for 30 years. The book came out. The film. A generation learned names the generation before had no access to. That happened because the names existed somewhere. Personnel files, internal memos, a payroll document with Dorothy Vaughan's name on it. The record had pushed them out of the public history while keeping their names in the files. There was a thread. Someone followed it. The Viking navigators left no thread. Not in any archive, not in any file, not in anything that omitted them and could be corrected. They weren't pushed out of a written record. They were never in one. The oral chain broke in 1020 AD, and what followed wasn't built to hold that kind of knowledge. There's no payroll document. There's no institutional record holding them in the background while the public history didn't. Shetterly found a thread because there was one to find. Here there's nothing to pull on. Not the injustice of what happened, which at least fits a pattern people recognize. The fact that there's no recovery here, no version where someone finds the file. The file never existed. There is no version of this story that ends with the names recovered. In 2021, a research team tried to reconstruct the navigational system inside the Vinland sagas. Not the events, not the settlements, but the technique itself. They found bird sighting patterns, swell descriptions, sea color references across both saga texts. Their paper is in an academic journal. It's findable. Somewhere in the footnotes, there's a sentence noting that the original practitioners of the system are unidentifiable, not obscure, not hard to find, not lost in a fire, unidentifiable. The researchers got to the end of what the evidence contains and wrote down what they found, which was nothing. A blank where names should be. The oral chain broke in 1020 AD. The written record that followed wasn't built to carry them. The footnote isn't a gap in the research. It's where the research ran out. Columbus sailed in 1492, 472 years after the chain broke. He carried a compass that deflected near his own ship's iron fittings, a problem the Viking navigators had solved with a piece of crystal. He had no read on what birds meant at different distances from land, no feel for how deep ocean swells differ from coastal water through a hull. He solved from scratch what had already been solved. And because the first solution left no record, nobody knew that. Not Columbus, not his crew, not anyone who funded the voyage. The knowledge was simply gone. The work they did had to be done again. The category was missing in 1000 AD. In 2021, a researcher wrote unidentifiable in a footnote and stopped. Same problem, different century. Put the sunstone down. You've been holding it against a grey sky. You felt the two images shift when you found the angle. The first person who held this stone to this sky saw the same two images appear, worked out what it meant, stood next to someone on a wet deck and pressed it into their hands and said, like this. That person taught the next. The next taught the one after. The chain ran for generations across the North Atlantic, through fog, through winter crossings, on an ocean with no fixed points. Then Vinland was abandoned. The chain contracted. The crossing stopped. The names, never written anywhere, just went. The Grœnlendinga Saga records 35 men on Erikson's ship. It records their provisions, the buildings they raised, the timber they cut, the grapes they found, the axe that killed one of them. It gives Erikson's name 31 times. It does not name the man who held the sunstone. You build a record that tracks outcomes and credits the men who commissioned them. You leave the craftsman in the background, in the chain, in the hands pressing knowledge into other hands on a dark deck. No decision required, no malice. If someone had chosen to erase them, you could at least name the choice. The system worked as designed. They just didn't fit in it. It was never going to hold them. The ocean they crossed still exists. The routes still carry ships. The names are gone.